The snow drifted down in silent sheets across Vermont's back roads, swallowing the yellow dividing lines beneath a blanket of white that grew thicker with each passing minute. Inside the black Range Rover, Victoria Ashford drummed manicured fingers against leather steering wheel, watching the dashboard clock blink forward another minute. 9:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and she was still 2 hours from Boston with another investor meeting to prep, another set of projections to review, another night where sleep would have to wait until the work was done. Her phone buzzed against the center console. Marcus Caldwell's name flashed across the screen with a text preview that made her pulse quicken. "Victoria, Pierce is playing us, and I found something in the books. We need to talk. Tonight." She reached for the phone just as the Range Rover's engine coughed. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. The power steering locked. Victoria's hands fought the wheel as the vehicle coasted sideways, tires finding no purchase on the ice-slicked asphalt. The world outside became a blur of white and dark, headlights sweeping across skeletal trees before the car shuddered to a complete stop 20 feet off the road, nose first in a snowbank. Silence pressed in from all sides. No engine hum, no heater fan, just the wind howling outside and her own breath fogging in air that grew colder by the second. 15 years building an empire from nothing. One stupid mechanical failure, and it could all collapse while she sat stranded in the middle of nowhere. Victoria jabbed the ignition button. Nothing. She tried again, pumping the brake, checking the gear shift. The dashboard remained dark except for one blinking error symbol she didn't recognize. Her engineering background from Stanford told her this wasn't a simple fix. Modern luxury vehicles packed too many computer systems, too many points of failure when temperatures dropped below zero. She grabbed her phone. The screen showed one bar of signal, then none, then one again. Marcus's text still glowed on the lock screen. She swiped to call him back, but the connection failed before the first ring. Tried again. Same result. The signal bars flickered and vanished entirely. Outside the windows, nothing but white stretched in every direction. No headlights, no buildings, no signs of civilization. The GPS had stopped working 3 miles back when she'd taken what looked like a shortcut. Now she couldn't even pinpoint her exact location beyond somewhere between Burlington and Boston. Victoria pulled her cashmere coat tighter. The temperature inside the car was already dropping fast. She checked the time on her phone, 9:47. 4 minutes since the engine died. By her calculation, she had maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia became a real concern. Maybe an hour, if she was lucky. Her father's face flashed through her mind. Samuel Ashford, immunologist, dead at 53 because 3 different doctors had diagnosed him with pneumonia when he'd actually had stage 3 lung cancer. 4 months from first cough to funeral. Her mother, Catherine, had driven herself into oncoming traffic 2 weeks later. Grief turning a moment of distraction into another tragedy that destroyed what remained of Victoria's family. She'd built Medicare health systems on that foundation of loss. Every algorithm, every diagnostic tool, every partnership and patent had been designed to prevent other families from suffering the same failures that had killed her parents. $500,000 in life insurance money had become seed capital. 16-hour days had become normal. Relationships had been sacrificed. Everything had been worth it, because the mission mattered more than comfort. And now David Whitmore, her co-founder and oldest friend, was apparently trying to steal it all, while she sat freezing in a dead car. Victoria forced herself to think methodically. She had emergency supplies in the back. Blanket, flashlight, first aid kit. She could survive the night if necessary. But the board meeting was in 48 hours. Marcus's warning suggested something urgent was happening right now. Every minute she spent trapped out here was another minute David had to consolidate power, manipulate board members, execute whatever plan he'd been laying. She tried the phone again. Still no signal. The battery showed 42%. Not enough to last through the night if she kept trying to connect. She powered it down to conserve energy. Headlights appeared in the distance, bright spots cutting through the snowfall. Victoria's chest loosened slightly. She opened the door and stepped out into knee-deep snow, waving her arms as the approaching vehicle slowed. Not a car. A tow truck, old and dented but moving steadily through conditions that had killed her expensive SUV. The truck pulled alongside and stopped. The driver's door opened and a man climbed down, tall and broad-shouldered despite the heavy winter coat. He carried a professional flashlight and moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this countless times before. His voice carried over the wind, warm and unhurried. "Need a hand, ma'am? Roads aren't kind to city cars tonight." Victoria sized him up in the flashlight's reflected glow. Work boots, faded jeans, flannel visible beneath his coat. Hands rough and scarred from physical labor. Face weathered by sun and cold, maybe late 30s, maybe 40. Not the polished venture capitalists and board members she normally dealt with. This was someone who worked with his hands, who fixed things instead of theorizing about them. She gestured toward the dead Range Rover. "Engine died. Everything's out. I need to get to Boston tonight." He approached her vehicle and opened the hood without asking permission, directing his flashlight across the engine compartment. From the truck's passenger side, a small face appeared in the window. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, wearing a red knit cap with a white pom-pom. The man glanced back. "Stay in the truck, Emma. It's cold." The girl waved at Victoria instead, breath fogging the glass. Victoria managed a tight smile, not sure what else to do. Children existed in her world as abstract concepts, things her employees occasionally mentioned as reasons for schedule flexibility. She had no idea how to interact with them directly. The man straightened from examining the engine, pulling out a diagnostic scanner connected by cable to a port under the dashboard. He watched the screen for a long moment before shaking his head. "ECU failure triggered by extreme cold. Alternator's dead too. Looks like your fuel injection system's compromised as well." Victoria's engineering background translated the technical terms into implications she didn't want to hear. Electronic control unit failure meant the car's computer brain had crashed. No quick roadside fix. No magic button to reset everything. She kept her voice level. "This car's 2 years old. Top of the line. It can't just fail completely." The man's expression held no judgment, just pragmatic acceptance. "Luxury cars in Vermont winters don't mix well. Electronics fail at -15 Fahrenheit. Third Range Rover this month alone with the same problem." He disconnected the scanner and closed the hood, then looked at her properly for the first time. His eyes were blue-gray, steady and measuring. Whatever assessment he made in that moment, he kept it to himself. "I can tow you to Pine Ridge. Town's about 5 miles ahead. There's an inn, though this time of year they're usually full with families visiting for Christmas." Victoria calculated rapidly. 5 miles, small town, no guarantee of rooms, but staying here meant freezing, and her phone wasn't getting signal regardless. She nodded. "How long to fix the car?" He walked around the Range Rover, assessing. "Parts need to come from the Mercedes Jaguar Land Rover dealer in Montpelier. That's 90 miles. With this storm, roads are closing fast. I'd say minimum 4 to 5 days before I can even get the parts ordered and delivered. Maybe a week with the holiday." The number hit like a physical blow. A week. The board meeting was in 2 days. Every contingency plan she'd built her life around assumed she could always get where she needed to be through money, connections, or sheer determination. None of those assets meant anything out here. "That's not acceptable. I have critical meetings in Boston. There has to be another option." The man shrugged. "There's buses, but none running tonight with the weather. Airport in Burlington's closed. Roads to interstate are getting shut down as we speak. Ma'am, I'm not trying to complicate your life. I'm just telling you how things are." He walked back to his truck and began hooking chains to her front axle. Victoria stood in the falling snow, watching him work with efficient motions that suggested years of practice. The girl in the truck window was still watching her, breath making clouds that obscured her face before clearing again. Victoria's phone buzzed once in her pocket. She yanked it out. 1 bar of signal had returned momentarily. A voicemail notification appeared. She tried to play it, but the connection dropped again before it loaded. The preview text showed it was from Marcus, time-stamped at 6:30 p.m., 2.5 hours ago. The man finished securing her car and gestured toward his truck. "You can sit in the cab. It's warmer. Emma won't mind." Victoria hesitated, then climbed into the passenger side. The interior smelled like coffee and pine air freshener. The girl Emma sat in the middle with a worn teddy bear clutched in her lap. She looked up at Victoria with wide eyes. "Are you a princess? You're dressed really pretty." Heat rose in Victoria's cheeks despite the cold. She glanced down at her wool suit and leather boots, clothes that cost more than most people spent on an entire wardrobe, but which felt absurd now in this context. The man climbed into the driver's seat and shot his daughter a gentle look. "Emma, what did we say about personal comments?" Emma's lower lip pushed out slightly. "But it's a nice comment." The truck pulled forward slowly, Victoria's Range Rover trailing behind on the chains. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the heater blowing warm air that gradually chased the cold from Victoria's bones. Emma broke the silence again. "What's your name? Where do you live? Why are you in Vermont on Christmas Eve?" Victoria glanced at the man, who offered a slight apologetic shrug. She turned back to Emma. "Victoria? Boston? Business meeting." Emma wrinkled her nose. "That's sad. Nobody should work on Christmas." The man's voice carried quiet correction. "Some people's jobs don't stop for holidays, Em." Emma crossed her arms. "That's a dumb rule. Daddy, that's a dumb rule, right?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "Your assessment is noted." Victoria found herself studying the cab's interior. A small bookshelf had been installed behind the seats, holding a surprising collection. Children's science books alongside engineering textbooks, a worn copy of Goodnight Moon next to something about advanced mechanical systems. On the dashboard, a laptop sat in a custom mount, screen displaying what looked like CAD software with a complex three-dimensional model rotating slowly. Her curiosity broke through professional reserve. "You use CAD software?" The man glanced at the screen, then back at the road. "Yeah. Side projects. Keeps the engineering brain from getting rusty." Something clicked in Victoria's mind. The technical terminology he'd used examining her car. The diagnostic equipment that was professional grade, not consumer level. The software that cost thousands of dollars for legitimate licenses. "You studied engineering?" He paused before answering. "MIT. Long time ago." MIT. One of the top 3 engineering programs in the country. Victoria had recruited from there regularly, offering 6-figure starting salaries to fresh graduates. And this man was driving a tow truck in rural Vermont. MIT isn't long time ago. Why is an MIT engineer fixing cars in a small town? His expression closed slightly, walls going up. Long story. Emma filled the uncomfortable silence. "Daddy used to make race cars. But then Mommy died and we moved here and—" The man's voice stayed gentle but firm. "Emma, that's private." The girl subsided, returning her attention to the teddy bear. Victoria absorbed the information. A wife who'd died, a move from wherever he'd been working before to this isolated place. The pieces suggested tragedy, but she'd learned long ago not to pry into personal matters unless they directly affected business. Pine Ridge appeared through the snow like something from a postcard. Main Street stretched perhaps 6 blocks, lined with Victorian-era buildings decorated with Christmas lights that glowed warm against the white. A hand-painted sign proclaimed, "Pine Ridge, Vermont, population 2,100, where neighbors are friends." The truck rolled slowly past darkened storefronts. Hargrove's Bakery, Anderson's Hardware, a small library with ornate columns. Everything closed for Christmas Eve, windows glowing with the soft light of interior decorations. It felt frozen in time, preserved from an era when small towns were self-sufficient communities rather than waypoints for travelers heading elsewhere. The man pulled into a parking lot beside a two-story building with a sign reading Pine Ridge Inn, established 1887. He left the engine running and climbed out, disappearing into the lobby. Victoria waited, watching Emma color in a notebook with crayons that had seen better days. He returned within 5 minutes, expression apologetic. 4 rooms, all full. Families in from out of town for the holidays. Victoria's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone. Still no reliable signal, just intermittent bars that appeared and vanished randomly. She tried searching for hotels within 50 miles. The phone spun, attempting to load results that wouldn't come. Is there anything else? Airbnb, motel? I'll pay premium rates. The man considered. Next hotel is in Montpelier. 30 miles, but they're closing Route 7 right now because of the storm. You might make it, might not. And if you get stranded halfway, there's nothing between here and there except forest. Emma's voice piped up. Daddy, she can stay in our apartment, like when Mrs. Patterson's heat broke last winter. The man's eyebrows rose. Emma, that's not... You always say helping people is important. It's Christmas Eve. We can't leave her out in the snow. Victoria watched the internal debate play across the man's face. He finally looked at her directly. There's an apartment above my garage shop. Used to be workspace before I converted it. Basic setup. Kitchenette, bathroom, small bedroom. Clean, warm. You're welcome to stay there until roads clear and we figure out your car situation. Every instinct Victoria had developed over 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder screamed suspicion. People didn't help strangers without expecting something in return. Every favor came with strings, spoken or implied, yet she was out of options, and the alternative was genuinely risking her life trying to drive through a blizzard in the dark. Why would you help me? We don't know each other. His answer came without hesitation. It's Christmas Eve, and you need help. What else matters? Emma bounced in her seat. A Christmas visitor, like in the stories Daddy reads. Victoria weighed the risks. Small town, probably low crime. He was clearly established here with a business and a daughter, not some transient threat, and practically speaking, she had no better alternative unless she wanted to sleep in the auto shop office. Thank you. I appreciate it. The man extended his hand. Lucas Brennan, that's Emma. Victoria shook his hand, noting the calluses and strength. Victoria Ashford. The truck pulled away from the inn and drove 3 more blocks to a 2-story building with Brennan's Auto Repair painted across the front. Large garage doors occupied the ground floor. A narrow staircase on the exterior led to a door on the 2nd level. Lucas maneuvered her Range Rover into one of the garage bays, then killed the engine. Emma scrambled out immediately, running through the snow toward the stairs. Lucas grabbed a duffel bag from behind his seat and gestured for Victoria to follow. The apartment exceeded her low expectations. Small but genuinely clean, with a kitchenette along one wall, a couch and coffee table in the center, and a bedroom visible through an open door. Christmas decorations hung everywhere, clearly handmade. Paper snowflakes cut from construction paper. A small tree in the corner with ornaments that looked crafted from felt and pipe cleaners. Strings of lights provided warm illumination that made the space feel cozy rather than cramped. Lucas set the duffel down. Bathrooms through the bedroom, towels in the closet. There's some food in the fridge, nothing fancy. I'll get your bag from your car. He disappeared back downstairs before Victoria could respond. Emma immediately began showing off decorations. I made all the snowflakes. Each one's different because that's how real snow works. And this ornament is an angel except her halo fell off, so now she's just a person with wings which Daddy says still counts. Victoria managed appropriate murmurs, overwhelmed by the child's enthusiasm and her own complete lack of experience in this situation. Lucas returned with her overnight bag and laptop case. Power should stay on. We've got a generator that kicks in if the grid fails. I'll come back first thing tomorrow morning to give you a better assessment of the car situation. There's a landline phone in the kitchen if you need to make calls. Cell service out here is unreliable in good weather, almost non-existent during storms. He started to leave, then paused. I know this isn't what you planned for Christmas Eve. I'm sorry your night got complicated. Victoria found unexpected sincerity in her response. You're helping a stranger when you could be home with your daughter. I'm the one who should apologize for disrupting your holiday. Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Emma's having the time of her life. She loves adventure, and honestly, towing cars is easier than explaining why Santa's handwriting looks suspiciously like mine. After they left, Victoria stood in the silent apartment and tried her phone again. 2 bars appeared. She immediately called Marcus, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried Maya, her assistant. Same result. The signal dropped entirely before she could try anyone else. She opened her laptop instead and waited for it to connect to the apartment's Wi-Fi network. The password was taped to the side of the router. Emma 2016, with a hand-drawn smiley face. Once connected, she pulled up her secure email. 47 unread messages. She scanned them rapidly. 3 from David Whitmore, each marked high importance. 2 from Board Chairman Richard Harlow. Multiple investor updates. Nothing from Marcus since this afternoon. David's first email had been sent at 4 p.m. Subject line, Q3 reconciliation. Urgent review needed. Victoria opened it. Dense financial tables filled the screen, formatted in the style Marcus typically used for quarterly reports. She skimmed the executive summary. According to these numbers, Medicor's revenue recognition had been accelerated inappropriately, booking contracts as complete when they were still in progress. Expenses for clinical trials had been understated. Several grants had been miscategorized in ways that inflated short-term profitability. David's email painted Marcus as careless at best, potentially fraudulent at worst. It recommended immediate forensic accounting and suggested placing Marcus on administrative leave pending investigation. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. She'd worked with Marcus for 8 years. He was meticulous to the point of obsession, the kind of CFO who caught errors in spreadsheets at 2 a.m. because he couldn't sleep, knowing something might be off by even $1. These weren't his mistakes. They were too obvious, too systematic. She opened the second email. This one was addressed to the full board, sent at 7 p.m. David had forwarded his earlier message and added his own analysis suggesting that Victoria had been aware of the irregularities and failed to act. He called for an emergency board meeting to discuss governance failures and necessary remediation. The third email made her blood run cold. Sent at 8:30 p.m., marked confidential to Richard Harlow only but CC'd to David's personal account. It suggested that Victoria's sudden unavailability during a crisis demonstrated questionable judgment and recommended the board consider interim leadership arrangements. David was moving fast, building a narrative of financial impropriety and leadership failure, creating documentation that would justify removing her while appearing to act in the company's best interest. Victoria pulled up her personal backup of the financial systems. She maintained encrypted copies of core data precisely because she'd learned never to trust that institutional systems would remain accessible. The files took several minutes to download over the spotty connection. When the way finally opened, she spent an hour comparing them line by line against what David had sent to the board. The discrepancies became obvious quickly. Revenue numbers had been altered in David's version. Expense timing had been shifted. The changes were sophisticated enough to look legitimate at first glance, but systematic enough to create a clear pattern once you knew to look for it. 47 transactions modified, all changes made within the past 6 weeks, all benefiting the same narrative, that Medicor was more profitable than reality, that corners had been cut to achieve those numbers, and that management had failed to maintain proper controls. Victoria cross-referenced the access logs. Only 3 people had the credentials to modify these specific records: herself, Marcus, and David. Marcus had been out on medical leave for knee surgery during 4 of the 6 weeks when the changes were made. That left 2 suspects, and Victoria knew she hadn't touched these files. Her phone buzzed. Signal had returned temporarily. She grabbed it and found 5 new voicemails waiting, all from Marcus, time-stamped between 6:30 and 8:45 p.m. She played the first one. "Victoria, answer your phone. It's urgent." Second voicemail. "Damn it, Victoria, if you're hearing this, David's meeting with board members. Richard Harlow, Susan Kingsley, private meeting, without me, without you. Something's happening." Third voicemail, this time from Maya. "Victoria, Marcus asked me to pass a message. He said, check backup server financial files. Compare to main. I don't understand, but he said you would." Fourth voicemail was just static and heavy breathing before disconnecting. The number showed as blocked. Fifth voicemail, Marcus again, voice tight with fear. "Victoria, I've been locked out of financial systems. David called IT, said I violated security protocols. Bullshit. He's erasing tracks. I copied files to personal drive before being cut off. But Victoria, they're calling emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., David's making his move. You need to..." The message cut off mid-sentence. Victoria checked the timestamp. 8:45 p.m. That was when her car had died, when she'd been standing in the snow waiting for Lucas's truck. Marcus had been trying to warn her in real time while she'd been completely unreachable. She tried calling him back, straight to voicemail. Tried David, same result. Tried Richard Harlow, the board chairman. His phone rang 4 times before a curt voicemail greeting played. The laptop screen showed an email arriving. Subject line, Board Meeting Agenda, December 26th, 3 p.m., sent from Richard Harlow's assistant at 9:20 p.m. just minutes ago. Victoria opened it with a sense of dread that proved justified. The agenda contained one item: Vote of Confidence, CEO Leadership and Governance Review. David had done it. In the space of a few hours on Christmas Eve, he'd manufactured a crisis, positioned himself as the responsible party discovering problems, isolated both Victoria and Marcus, and convinced the board chairman to call an emergency meeting where her leadership would be put to a vote. She should have seen it coming. David had been pushing for changes over the past year, wanted the company to go public, to prioritize quarterly earnings over long-term research. Victoria had refused, arguing that Medicor's mission couldn't survive the pressure of public markets. They'd fought about it in November, their worst argument in 15 years of partnership. David had called her short-sighted. She'd called him mercenary. They'd agreed to disagree and moved on. Or so she'd thought. Victoria stood and paced the small apartment, mind racing through scenarios. The board meeting was in approximately 40 hours. She needed to get back to Boston, needed to gather her own evidence, needed to build a defense that would stand up against David's manufactured documentation. But her car was dead. Roads were closed. Even if she could somehow get transportation, she'd arrive with barely any time to prepare. David would have spent 2 full days lobbying board members, building his case, positioning her absence as further evidence of leadership failure. A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiral. Lucas stood outside holding a thermos and a plate covered with aluminum foil. "Emma insisted I bring you dinner. She's worried you'll be hungry." Victoria accepted the plate, pulling back the foil to reveal a turkey sandwich and Christmas cookies shaped like trees and stars. The kindness was so unexpected, so divorced from the corporate warfare she was drowning in, that her throat tightened. "Thank you. Tell Emma I said thank you too." Lucas nodded. "I saw lights on, figured you might be working. I don't know what your business is, but if it's urgent enough to have you this stressed on Christmas Eve, I'm guessing the car situation is a real problem." Victoria considered how much to share. Lucas was a stranger, but he was also an MIT engineer who clearly understood complex systems, and she desperately needed someone to talk through the situation with, even if they couldn't actually help. "Someone I trusted is trying to steal my company. They've manufactured evidence of financial fraud and convinced the board to call an emergency meeting while I'm stranded here. Every hour I'm stuck gives them more time to consolidate power. Lucas processed that. Stealing a company takes more than evidence. Takes relationships, board votes. You must have allies. 2, maybe 3 out of 7 board members. Not enough. He leaned against the doorframe. What about the evidence they've manufactured? Can you prove it's false? Victoria gestured at her laptop. I have backup files showing the real numbers. But my word against theirs, especially when I'm not physically present to defend myself, isn't enough. They'll say I created the backups after the fact, that I'm scrambling to cover my tracks. Lucas thought for a moment. You need a witness, someone with access who can verify the timeline, show when files were modified and by whom. My CFO. But they've locked him out of the systems and discredited him as potentially complicit. His testimony looks self-serving now. They stood in silence. Lucas finally straightened. For what it's worth, I dealt with corporate betrayal. Different context, but same dynamics. Someone I trusted used my work and tried to bury me when I objected. So I understand what you're going through. Victoria studied his face, seeing truth in the grim set of his jaw. What did you do? Walked away. Couldn't win against their lawyers and their budget. But I kept copies of everything. And 3 years later, when they tried to claim my patents, I had the documentation to prove prior art. Cost them millions in licensing fees they thought they'd stolen free. A spark of something like hope flickered in Victoria's chest. You planned ahead, even when you thought you'd lost. Always assume the fight isn't over just because you lost the first round. Document everything. Trust nobody. And never underestimate the value of being more patient than your opponent. After he left, Victoria returned to her laptop and began methodically documenting everything she'd found. Screenshots of the altered files with timestamps, comparison tables showing the discrepancies, access logs proving when changes were made. She uploaded everything to 3 separate encrypted cloud accounts, then emailed copies to her personal attorney with instructions to release them publicly if she didn't check in within 72 hours. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the apartment except for the glow of her laptop battery. Victoria grabbed the flashlight she'd noticed earlier on the kitchenette counter. Before she could move further, the lights came back on. Not from the grid. The quality was slightly different, the hum of a generator audible from somewhere below. Lucas had mentioned backup power. Within 2 minutes of the outage, his system had activated automatically. Victoria walked to the window and looked out over Pine Ridge. The entire town had gone dark except for scattered emergency lights. But this building glowed warm and steady, powered by generators that had been maintained and ready for exactly this scenario. Lucas Brennan was someone who prepared for worst-case scenarios, who built redundancy into critical systems, who didn't trust that the primary option would always work. Her phone buzzed with a text that managed to squeeze through before signal dropped again. From a number she didn't recognize. V, need to meet ASAP, no email, no company phone. Pierce found something. David knows. M, Marcus. Using a burner phone or borrowed device, warning her through back channels because he couldn't trust normal communication. Victoria's hands shook as she typed a response. Stranded Vermont. Car dead. Roads closed. What did Pierce find? The message showed as sending for 30 seconds before failing with a red exclamation mark. No signal again. She tried calling the number, straight to a generic voicemail. Tried texting again. Same failure. Outside, the snow continued falling steadily, each flake adding to the barrier between her and Boston, between her company and David's coup, between 15 years of work and the destruction of everything she'd built. Victoria returned to the window. Down in the street, she could see Lucas's truck parked beside the garage bay holding her Range Rover. A thought occurred to her. desperate and probably impossible but worth exploring. She grabbed her coat and headed downstairs. Lucas was in the garage, work lights rigged to the generator, examining her car's engine compartment with the kind of focus she recognized from watching master surgeons operate. "Is there any way to get it running? Even temporarily? I'll pay whatever it takes." Lucas didn't look up from the engine. "Not safely. ECU is completely fried. Even if I bypass the computer controls, the alternator's dead and the fuel system is compromised. You might get 5 miles before it stranded you someplace worse than here." Victoria's voice came out harder than she intended. "I don't care about safety. I care about getting to Boston." Now he did look at her, expression grave. "Ma'am, I'm not going to rig something that could leave you broken down on a highway in a blizzard. That's how people die. My company is dying right now. My career, everything I've worked for since I was 22 years old." Lucas straightened, wiping grease from his hands. "And you think sacrificing your life will save it?" The blunt question stopped Victoria's building tirade. She took a breath, forced herself to think clearly. He was right. Dying in a car fire or freezing on a roadside wouldn't help Medicor, wouldn't stop David, would actually make his case that she'd been reckless and unstable. She lowered her voice. "I'm sorry, I know you're trying to help. I just feel completely powerless." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "Come here, let me show you something." He led her to a corner of the garage where a workbench sat covered by a tarp. With careful movements, he pulled the covering away to reveal a 3-foot prototype model of some kind of electrical system, surrounded by technical drawings and printed patent applications. "Autonomous power redundancy system for critical care facilities. Combines solar, microwind, and proprietary battery chemistry for rural hospitals, emergency clinics, anywhere grid power fails and backup generators aren't enough." Victoria's engineer eye immediately recognized the sophistication of the design. The battery chemistry alone looked revolutionary, graphene-enhanced compounds she'd only seen in experimental lab settings. The control systems were elegant, redundant without being wasteful. "This is MIT-level work, more advanced than most commercial products I've seen." Lucas's voice carried old bitterness. "Should be. Spent 4 years developing it. Started 3 months after my wife died because the hospital lost power that night. 6 hours waiting for a backup generator truck to arrive. 6 hours when a CT scanner could have caught her brain tumor early enough to do something." The words landed like physical blows. Victoria thought about her father's misdiagnosed pneumonia, her mother's grief-driven accident. Every tragedy traced back to system failures, to moments when the right tool or the right test or the right backup could have made the difference between life and death. "Why is it still sitting in your garage instead of saving lives in hospitals?" Lucas covered the prototype again. "Because every investor I approached wanted 80% equity and full control, wanted to strip out the expensive parts to increase profit margins, wanted to sell to rich hospitals in cities instead of rural clinics that actually need it most. I won't sell my wife's legacy so some venture capitalist can prioritize returns over human lives." Victoria understood that impulse completely. It was why she'd refused to take Medicor public, why she'd fought David's push for quarterly optimization over long-term innovation. The moment you let profit drive every decision, the mission got buried under spreadsheets. She found herself making a calculation that would have seemed insane 48 hours ago. "What if we partnered? You keep majority ownership, full creative control. My company provides capital, regulatory support, distribution, 60-40 profit split. You retain all intellectual property rights." Lucas's expression closed off immediately. "I've heard versions of that pitch before. Then the contracts get negotiated and suddenly I'm an employee and you own everything. Then you draft the terms. Right now, I'll sign whatever you write, with one condition. We implement this system as fast as possible in facilities that need it most, regardless of ability to pay top dollar." Lucas crossed his arms. Why? You don't know me. This project could fail. You have a company crisis happening. This is literally the worst possible time to take on a speculative partnership. Victoria met his eyes. Because David Whitmore is accusing me of prioritizing profit over innovation, of cutting corners to hit quarterly targets. If I announce a partnership with an independent inventor that explicitly values mission over money, it proves my actual values to the board. Shows I'm still the person who founded Medicor, not who David claims I've become. So you're using my life's work as a political shield? The accusation stung because it was partially true, but only partially. I'm using corporate politics to fund technology that will save lives. Your wife died from system failure. My parents died from system failure. How many more people die while your invention sits in this garage because you can't find funding that meets your ethical standards? Lucas stared at the covered prototype for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the generator's hum. If I agree to this, you still need to get to Boston. Which brings me back to your car. It can't be fixed quickly, but maybe it can be rigged to run long enough to get you there, if you're willing to accept serious risks. Victoria's pulse quickened. What kind of risks? 30% chance the bypass system fails catastrophically. Engine could seize, coolant could leak and catch fire. Best case, if it fails, you're stranded somewhere with no heat. Worst case, you don't make it out. The numbers hung between them. 30% chance of serious danger. 70% chance of making it to Boston in time to defend her company. Victoria had built a career on calculated risks, on pushing boundaries when the potential payoff justified the danger. How long to rig it? Lucas checked his watch. 18 hours of straight work. If roads open by noon tomorrow, you could leave around 1 p.m. Reach Boston by 8 or 9 p.m. Gives you about 6 hours to prepare before your board meeting. 6 hours. Not nearly enough to build a comprehensive defense, to lobby wavering board members, to counter whatever narrative David had been constructing. But infinitely better than missing the meeting entirely. Do it. Lucas nodded slowly. I'll need to work through the night. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard regardless of whether you make it to Boston. Victoria started to leave, then paused. Why are you doing this? Really, you barely know me. This isn't your fight. Lucas's expression held old pain. Because I lost someone I loved to medical system failure. Because I've watched corporations prioritize profit over people and called it business. And because someone who risks their life to save their company from being stolen by vultures deserves a fighting chance. After returning upstairs, Victoria tried once more to reach Marcus. Still no signal. She attempted to access Medicor's internal systems through VPN, but the connection was too unstable. Finally, she shut the laptop and forced herself to lie down on the small bed. Sleep seemed impossible with so many thoughts racing through her mind. David's betrayal, Marcus's warning, the board meeting looming, Lucas's unexpected offer of partnership, the very real possibility that tomorrow could end with either her death in a car fire or the loss of her company to corporate coup. But exhaustion eventually claimed her, dragging her under into troubled dreams where she ran through endless corridors searching for her father, while David's voice echoed from speakers announcing her removal as CEO over and over until the words became meaningless sound. She woke to the smell of coffee and small footsteps on the stairs outside. Emma's voice called through the door. "Victoria! Daddy says if you're awake, we made breakfast, and Santa came." Victoria checked her phone. 6:47 a.m., Christmas morning. 18 new emails, most from David continuing to build his case to various board members. One from Richard Harlow requesting she contact him immediately. Nothing from Marcus. She splashed water on her face in the bathroom, trying to look less like someone who'd slept 3 hours while their world collapsed. When she opened the apartment door, Emma stood on the landing holding a red stocking with white trim. "This one's for you. I told Daddy that Santa needs to leave presents for everyone or it's not fair." Victoria accepted the stocking, genuinely touched despite the absurdity of the situation. Inside, chocolate bar, thick wool socks, a small snow globe containing a miniature version of Pine Ridge's Main Street, and a hand-drawn card showing 3 stick figures standing beside a Christmas tree. Labels identified them as Daddy, Emma, and Victoria. "Thank you, Emma. This is very thoughtful." The girl beamed. "Come have breakfast. We have cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate." She followed Emma down to the garage level where Lucas had set up a small table near the space heater. The cinnamon rolls were clearly homemade, steam still rising from their centers. Lucas poured coffee that smelled far better than it had any right to given the circumstances. He looked exhausted, grease smudged across his forehead, clothes rumpled from working all night. But his eyes held satisfaction. "Made good progress. Made good. Your car should be drivable by 10 p.m. if the roads open on schedule." Emma climbed into her chair and began explaining her Christmas morning in detail, from how she'd woken up at 5:30 but stayed in bed like she'd promised, to how Santa had eaten the cookies they'd left out and written a thank you note in handwriting that looked nothing like her father's, obviously. Victoria found herself relaxing slightly despite everything. There was something grounding about the simple ritual of Christmas morning with a family who'd opened their home to a stranger. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, Lucas's steady presence reassuring, but the moment couldn't last. Victoria's phone buzzed with enough force to rattle against the metal table. She grabbed it. 3 bars of signal stronger than anything she'd managed since arriving in Pine Ridge. She immediately called Marcus. This time it connected. 2 rings before he answered, voice raw. "Victoria. Thank God. Where are you?" "Stranded in Vermont." "Marcus, what's happening? What did Pierce find?" Marcus spoke rapidly, words tumbling over each other. "The financial irregularities David sent to the board. I tracked every single change. Someone with David's credentials altered 47 transactions over 6 weeks. Front-loaded revenue, buried expenses. Made us look 18% more profitable than reality." Victoria's stomach dropped. "You're sure it was David?" "Access logs don't lie. And Victoria, there's more. I found draft contracts in his deleted files. He's been negotiating with TechMed Solutions. If he can destabilize you, force a leadership change, TechMed acquires us at a distressed price. David gets CEO role with them. $40 million package over 5 years." The scale of the betrayal took her breath away. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was planned, methodical destruction of everything they'd built together. Also, David could cash out with TechMed and leave her holding responsibility for fraud she hadn't committed. "The board meeting is today at 3 p.m. Can you attend?" Marcus's voice cracked. "They've locked me out of everything. David called out last night, claimed I violated security protocols. Security escorted me out of the building at 9 p.m. Victoria, they're treating me like the criminal while David plays savior discovering the fraud." Victoria closed her eyes. David had isolated both of them perfectly. Marcus couldn't testify without looking self-serving. Victoria couldn't defend herself from Vermont without looking negligent. "I'm trying to get back. Roads permitting, I'll be there by 9 p.m. tonight. Can you hold the board off until tomorrow?" "Already tried." Richard Harlow refused, said the crisis requires immediate action. David's been lobbying hard, got Kingsley and Fairchild on his side. Best count, you have Westbrook supporting you and maybe Pemberton if you can reach him before the meeting. Everyone else is leaning toward David's narrative. The math was brutal. 7 board members. Victoria needed 4 votes. She had 2 confirmed, maybe 3 if Pemberton could be convinced. Not enough. What about Pierce? If he knows about David's tech med connection, Pierce withdrew his investment offer last night, cited the financial irregularities and questions about governance. David's people must have fed him the altered documents before we could correct the record. Victoria gripped the phone tighter. There has to be something we can do, some way to prove David manipulated the files. I copied everything to encrypted personal storage before they locked me out. Originals, access logs, timestamps, everything. But they'll claim I'm the one who created false evidence to cover my tracks. Without independent verification, it's our word against his. Lucas had been listening while pretending to focus on his cinnamon roll. Now, he spoke up. What about the board chairman? If David's staging a coup, he needs Harlow's cooperation. People like that don't take sides without protecting themselves. Find out what David offered him. Victoria processed that. Richard Harlow has been with Medicor since the Series A funding. He's always been cautious but fair. Lucas shrugged. Nobody stages this kind of operation without securing the referee first. Your CFO should dig into Harlow's communications with David. Bet there's a deal. Marcus had heard. I can access Richard's email remotely if you authorize it as CEO. It's technically legal under emergency governance provisions. Victoria hesitated only a second. Do it. Send everything you find to my personal account, encrypted. After the call ended, she sat staring at her phone. Emma had stopped chattering and was watching her with concerned 8-year-old eyes. Are you okay? You look sad. Victoria managed a smile that felt like plastic. Just work problems, Emma. Nothing for you to worry about. Emma considered that. Daddy says when there's problems, you make a plan and work the plan. Do you have a plan? Out of the mouths of children. Victoria glanced at Lucas, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She turned back to Emma. I'm working on it. The rest of Christmas morning passed in a blur. Lucas returned to the garage, working on Victoria's Range Rover with focused intensity. Victoria tried repeatedly to reach board members on her phone, managing to connect with Patricia Westbrook for a brief conversation that confirmed her continued support, but revealed that David had been systematically undermining Victoria's reputation for weeks. By noon, the snow had stopped. Road crews were making progress on the major routes. Lucas emerged from the garage covered in grease, but wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. She'll run, barely. Don't go over 60, and if the temperature gauge hits red, pull over immediately. You'll have maybe 300 miles before the bypass system fails, maybe less. Victoria gathered her belongings and loaded them into the Range Rover. Emma hugged her tightly. You have to come back. You promised. Victoria knelt to the girl's level. I keep my promises. Emma held out her pinky finger. Pinky promise? Victoria linked pinkies solemnly. Pinky promise. Lucas handed her a folder. Partnership proposal. I worked on it last night between fixing your car. Legal terms. Technical specifications. IP protections. If you're serious about this, use it. Victoria accepted the folder, genuinely surprised. You actually trust me? Lucas's expression held complicated emotions. I trust who you're trying to be. Whether you can stay that person after you win your fight, that's the real question. The Range Rover's engine growled uncertainly as Victoria guided it onto the cleared section of Route 7, watching the dashboard display a constellation of warning lights that Lucas had explained would stay illuminated for the entire journey. The bypass system he'd rigged operated on borrowed time, mechanical prayer, and engineering ingenuity that pushed safety margins into territory no manufacturer would approve. Behind her, Pine Ridge disappeared into the rearview mirror, Emma's small figure waving from the garage bay entrance until distance swallowed the image entirely. The first 20 miles passed without incident. Victoria kept the speedometer needle locked at 55, hyper-aware of every sound the engine made, every vibration through the steering column. The temperature gauge hovered just below the red zone, threatening but not yet critical. Snow-covered farmland stretched endlessly on both sides, punctuated by occasional houses showing Christmas decorations visible even in afternoon light. Her phone connected to a cellular tower somewhere near Middlebury. Messages flooded in. 3 missed calls from Patricia Westbrook, 2 voicemails from board members she hadn't expected to hear from directly, and 1 email from Marcus marked urgent with an attachment labeled Harlow Communications. Victoria pulled into a rest area that had been partially cleared by plows. The engine ticked and hissed as it cooled. She opened Marcus's email and began reading the forwarded messages between Richard Harlow and David Whitmore. The correspondence dated back 5 months. Initial exchanges were innocuous, discussing board strategy and company direction. But the tone shifted dramatically in November, right after Victoria had rejected David's IPO proposal. David's message from November 8th spelled out his strategy with startling clarity. He'd identified Richard's concern about Victoria's resistance to maximizing shareholder value, suggested that her mission-driven rigidity was preventing Medicor from achieving its full market potential, painted himself as the pragmatic alternative who understood that doing good and making money weren't mutually exclusive. Richard's responses showed careful consideration. He didn't commit immediately, but he didn't shut David down either. By late November, the messages revealed active collusion. Richard would support a leadership transition if David could demonstrate clear governance failures. David promised Richard protection from any fallout, guaranteed board chairmanship continuity, and implied financial arrangements that weren't explicitly detailed but clearly understood. The smoking gun appeared in an email dated December 20th. David outlined his plan to manufacture financial irregularities that would point to Victoria and Marcus. Richard's response was chilling in its brevity. "Proceed carefully. Document everything. I'll ensure the board treats this appropriately." Victoria's hands shook as she forwarded the entire chain to her personal attorney with instructions to preserve it as evidence. This wasn't just corporate gamesmanship. This was conspiracy to commit fraud, potentially criminal conduct that could destroy careers and trigger federal investigations. She called Marcus. "I got your email. This is enough to bury them both." Marcus sounded exhausted. "Maybe. But we need independent verification. Good attorneys will argue those emails are out of context, that we've misinterpreted business discussions. We need something more concrete." Victoria watched steam rise from the Range Rover's hood. "What about TechMed? If we can prove David's been negotiating their acquisition while sabotaging our company, already working that angle." I reached out to a contact at TechMed's investment bank. "They're willing to talk off record, but only after our board meeting. Nobody wants to get involved in a live corporate fight until they know which side wins." The pragmatism made sense even as it frustrated Victoria. In the corporate world, people backed winners and abandoned losers with ruthless efficiency. Until she proved she could survive David's coup, nobody would risk association with her potential failure. She checked the time. 1:45 p.m. The board meeting started at 3. Even with perfect conditions, she wouldn't reach Boston until 8 or 9 tonight. The meeting would be over. Her fate decided without her physical presence to argue her case. "Set up a video conference. I'll participate remotely." Marcus hesitated. "David's already anticipated that. He sent memo this morning arguing that CEO presence for a confidence vote requires physical attendance to ensure proper verification of identity and prevent technical manipulation of testimony. Got Richard to agree that board bylaws support his interpretation." Of course, David had blocked that option. He'd thought through every contingency, closed every escape route. The only way Victoria could defend herself was to be physically present in that boardroom, and he'd calculated precisely how long it would take her to return from Vermont. Unless she'd managed to leave earlier than he'd expected. Unless Lucas's improvised repairs bought her those critical extra hours. Victoria restarted the engine and pulled back onto the highway. The temperature gauge climbed immediately into the red zone. She cursed and eased off the accelerator, watching the needle slowly retreat to merely dangerous levels. Lucas's warning echoed. If the gauge stayed red, pull over and let it cool. But every minute stopped was another minute David had to consolidate power. She pushed the speed back up to 60, gambling that the cooling system could handle the strain. The gauge flickered between orange and red but held steady rather than spiking further. Miles accumulated slowly. Middlebury passed. Rutland appeared and disappeared. The highway climbed into mountains where wind buffeted the Range Rover hard enough to require constant steering corrections. Another message arrived, this time from Patricia Westbrook. "Victoria, where are you? David's telling everyone you've abandoned ship during crisis. He's scheduling the vote for 5 p.m. instead of 3 to give you every possible chance to appear, making himself look reasonable while hanging you with your absence. Call me." Victoria dialed immediately. "Patricia, I'm driving back from Vermont. Car broke down during the storm. I should be there by 8 p.m. tonight." Patricia's voice carried the hard edge of someone calculating political realities. 8 p.m. doesn't help. The vote happens at 5. David's maneuvering beautifully. He delayed the meeting 2 hours and framed it as giving you more time, which makes him look generous. When you still don't show, it proves his point that you're unreliable. Can you delay further? Find procedural grounds to push it to tomorrow? I tried. Richard shut me down. Says the crisis requires immediate resolution. Victoria, I'm being honest with you. The votes aren't there. Harlow, Kingsley, and Fairchild are with David. Sinclair and Blackwell are leaning his direction. I'm your only firm support, and I'm 1 vote out of 7. The math was worse than Victoria had calculated. She needed 4 votes from 7 board members. She had 1 confirmed. Even if she somehow flipped 2 undecided members, that only brought her to 3. Not enough. "What about Pemberton?" Patricia paused. "Harold's playing both sides, won't commit until he sees which way the wind blows. Classic fence-sitter. You'd need to give him something concrete. Something that makes supporting you the obviously safer choice." Victoria thought about the partnership proposal sitting on her passenger seat. Lucas's microgrid technology represented genuine innovation, the kind of breakthrough that could validate Medicor's mission-driven approach and demonstrate Victoria's commitment to advancing healthcare rather than just maximizing profits. But a partnership announcement wouldn't mean anything if she'd already lost the company. She needed leverage, something that would force board members to reconsider their positions, something that would expose David's betrayal in ways he couldn't deflect or explain away. "Patricia, can you get Daniel Pierce to attend the meeting as observer?" Pierce withdrew his investment. He's got no board standing. Victoria's mind raced through bylaws and corporate governance procedures. CEO has right to invite 1 advisor to board meetings. It's in the founding documents. Pierce doesn't need board standing if I'm inviting him as my advisor. Patricia absorbed that. If Pierce shows up and announces he's reconsidering investment based on new information, it might shift the calculation. But why would he do that? He's already publicly cited the financial irregularities as reason for withdrawal. Because I'm going to prove those irregularities were manufactured by David, and that Pierce made his decision based on fraudulent information. He'll want to correct the record before it becomes public knowledge that he was manipulated. You have evidence? Victoria thought about the files Marcus had compiled, the access logs showing David's modifications, the emails between David and Richard showing coordination. Enough to create reasonable doubt. Enough to make anyone who votes against me look either complicit or foolish when the truth comes out. Patricia's voice gained energy. I can reach Pierce, but Victoria, you need to be here for this to work. Video conference won't cut it. These people need to see you in person, defending yourself, demonstrating that you're still in control. I'll be there. Tell Richard the meeting doesn't start until I arrive, or until 6 p.m., whichever comes first. Frame it as giving me one final chance to address the board. He can't refuse without looking like he's rushing to judgment. After hanging up, Victoria pressed the accelerator harder. The speedometer climbed to 65. The temperature gauge edged deeper into red territory. The engine's sound changed, developing a slight knocking rhythm that couldn't be healthy. But the miles accumulated faster and Connecticut River Valley opened before her, highway descending from mountain passes into flatter terrain where speed limits increased and traffic thickened. Her phone rang. Maya, her assistant, voice tight with controlled panic. Victoria, David just sent company-wide email. Says he's been asked to serve as interim CEO pending resolution of governance questions. Announced immediate hiring freeze and expense review. People are terrified they're about to lose their jobs. Victoria's grip on the steering wheel tightened until her knuckles went white. He's consolidating power before the votes even happened, making it look like he's already in charge. What should I tell people? They're asking if you're okay, if you're coming back, what they should do. Tell them I'll be in the office tonight. Tell them the board hasn't voted on anything yet, and David's email is premature. Tell them to document everything, save all correspondence, and trust that the truth will come out. Maya hesitated. Victoria, some people are already updating their resumes. David's painting you as unstable, absent during crisis. Every hour you're not here reinforces his narrative. The observation stung because it was accurate. Victoria had spent 15 years building credibility as a steady, reliable leader who prioritized the company above everything else. Now David was using that reputation against her, turning her unplanned absence into evidence of abandonment. She crossed into Massachusetts. Traffic intensified around Springfield. The sun angled lower, casting long shadows that made judging distances difficult. The Range Rover's temperature gauge had been hovering in solid red territory for 30 miles, but the engine continued running despite every warning system insisting it shouldn't. Another email arrived, this time from David himself. Subject line, Emergency Measures, CEO Communication. The message was addressed to the full board and senior leadership. David outlined urgent steps required to stabilize the company during what he termed the current leadership vacuum. He proposed immediate financial controls, suspended all partnerships pending review, and recommended forming a special committee to investigate Victoria's tenure. The language was carefully chosen to avoid direct accusation while implying misconduct. Every sentence built the narrative of a responsible executive stepping up to save the company from irresponsible leadership. Victoria could see the political calculation behind each word, the way David positioned himself as reluctant savior rather than ambitious usurper. She drafted a response and sent it to the full board. I'm en route to Boston and will attend tonight's meeting in person. Allegations of financial impropriety are demonstrably false. I have documented evidence of systematic manipulation of corporate records by parties seeking to manufacture a leadership crisis for personal benefit. I look forward to presenting this evidence to the board and to appropriate authorities. The message was aggressive, drawing clear battle lines, but subtlety wouldn't serve her now. David had framed this as a crisis requiring immediate action. Victoria needed to reframe it as a conspiracy requiring investigation, shifting the burden of proof back onto him. Patricia called again. Your email to the board stirred things up. Sinclair wants to see your evidence before voting. Blackwell is nervous about potential legal exposure. Harold Pemberton actually called me, which he never does, asking if you've really got documentation of fraud. Victoria's spirits lifted slightly. Tell them I'll present everything at the meeting. Tell them anyone who votes against me before reviewing the evidence will be on record supporting what turns out to be an illegal coup. David's pushing back hard, says you're making wild accusations to deflect from legitimate governance concerns. He's demanding you provide evidence immediately so it can be reviewed by corporate counsel before the meeting. No, He gets to see it when everyone else does, in person, on record, where he can't spin or suppress it. Patricia's approval came through clearly. Good. Keep him off balance. I reached Pierce. He's willing to attend as your advisor, but he wants proof that the financial irregularities were manufactured. If you're wrong about this, Victoria, he'll destroy you for wasting his time. The weight of that settled heavily. Pierce was betting his reputation on Victoria's claims. If she couldn't deliver convincing evidence, she'd lose not just the board vote, but any possibility of salvaging the investor relationship. But if she could prove David's fraud, Pierce's presence would force board members to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the crisis. Traffic slowed approaching Worcester. Construction zones narrowed 3 lanes to 2, brake lights creating a river of red that stretched ahead for miles. Victoria checked the time. 4:15 p.m. The meeting was supposed to start at 5, but Patricia had pushed it back as late as possible. Every minute stuck in traffic was a minute closer to missing her window entirely. The temperature gauge had stopped fluctuating. It sat firmly in the red zone, the engine running despite temperatures that should have caused catastrophic failure. Lucas's bypass system was holding, but Victoria could smell coolant burning, could see steam rising from gaps in the hood. The vehicle was dying by degrees, mechanical self-destruction in slow motion. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. V. Found something big. David's TechMed contract includes provisions for eliminating competitive IP. Your diagnostic algorithms get shelved if acquisition proceeds. He's selling your life's work for executive pay package. Marcus, still operating through burner phones and encrypted channels. The revelation added another dimension to David's betrayal. He wasn't just stealing the company. He was planning to destroy its core innovations, the very technologies Victoria had developed to prevent diagnostic failures like the ones that killed her parents. She texted back, "Can you prove this?" Response came immediately. Signed term sheet, attached to email chain between David and TechMed CEO, sending to your personal account now. Victoria's laptop sat in her bag on the passenger seat. She couldn't safely review documents while driving, but knowing that evidence existed gave her confidence. David had been sloppy, leaving digital trails that would bury him once exposed. All Victoria needed was the opportunity to present those trails to people who could understand their significance. The traffic finally cleared past Worcester. Victoria accelerated hard, pushing the dying Range Rover to speeds that made the steering wheel vibrate and the engine emit concerning rattles. The sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. Darkness would arrive within an hour. The meeting would start in 45 minutes, whether she'd arrived or not. She called Patricia one more time. Status? Richard agreed to delay start until 5:30. Absolute final deadline. David's furious but had to accept it or look like he's afraid of confronting you. Everyone's gathering now. Pierce arrived 10 minutes ago and is waiting in the lobby per your instructions. Victoria, the temperature in here is Arctic. These people are deciding whether to end your career. Victoria merged onto I-90, the final stretch toward Boston. The city's skyline appeared in the distance, glass towers reflecting dying sunlight. Her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel for 5 straight hours. Her eyes burned from staring through the windshield at endless highway. But she was close now. So close she could visualize the route to Medicor's offices in her mind. The engine made a sound like grinding metal. The temperature gauge maxed out completely, needle pressed against the upper limit. Smoke began seeping from the hood, thin gray wisps that quickly thickened into concerning clouds. Victoria exited the highway onto surface streets, racing through yellow lights and taking corners faster than the compromised steering could comfortably handle. 3 blocks from Medicor's building, the engine seized. One moment the Range Rover was moving, the next it was coasting as the motor locked completely. Victoria guided it to the curb and abandoned it, grabbing her laptop bag and the folder Lucas had given her. She ran the remaining distance in office heels that weren't designed for sprinting, dodging pedestrians and ignoring the pain shooting through her calves. The Medicore lobby was glass and steel, modern design meant to project innovation and reliability. Victoria burst through the doors at 5:27 p.m., breathing hard, aware that she looked disheveled and desperate and completely unlike the controlled executive who'd left this building 3 days ago. Maya met her at the elevator. Thank God, they're waiting. 6th floor conference room. Victoria, you need to know David's been presenting his case for the past 20 minutes. He got Richard to agree to let him outline the situation before you arrived. The elevator ride lasted 30 seconds that felt like hours. Victoria used the time to check her reflection in the polished metal doors. Her hair was coming loose from its professional arrangement. Her suit was wrinkled from 5 hours of driving. She looked like someone who'd been through an ordeal, which was both accurate and terrible for the image she needed to project. The 6th floor conference room occupied a corner with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston's financial district. 7 board members sat around an oval table. David stood at the head with a presentation displayed on the large screen behind him, charts showing financial irregularities highlighted in accusatory red. Daniel Pierce sat in an observer chair along the wall, expression carefully neutral. Marcus Caldwell sat nearby, present but clearly not welcome based on how David's eyes narrowed at the sight of him. Victoria entered without apology or explanation. She set her laptop bag on the table and met Richard Harlow's gaze directly. I'm here to address the board's concerns and to present evidence of fraud. Richard's face was carved from professional neutrality. Ms. Ashford, your presence is noted. Mr. Whitmore was just concluding his presentation on the financial irregularities discovered in recent weeks. David turned toward her with an expression that managed to convey both concern and disappointment. A performance Victoria recognized as carefully rehearsed. Victoria, I'm relieved you made it safely. We've all been worried about your well-being. As I was explaining to the board, the issues we've uncovered require immediate attention regardless of the personal difficulties you've been facing. The phrasing positioned her absence as personal difficulties, reducing legitimate mechanical failure to character weakness. Victoria refused to take the bait. She opened her laptop and connected it to the conference room display system, displacing David's presentation. Before we discuss irregularities, let's discuss who created them. She pulled up the first file Marcus had compiled, side-by-side comparison of original financial records and the altered versions David had distributed. 47 transactions highlighted, changes documented with timestamps and access credentials. These are the actual financial records from our backup server. On the left, originals created by our CFO Marcus Caldwell using standard accounting protocols. On the right, modified versions distributed to the board and to investor Daniel Pierce. Note the timestamps. All modifications occurred between November 3rd and December 15th. Note the access credentials. All changes made by user account D. Whitmore. David's performance cracked slightly. Those files could have been created by anyone with system access. Victoria has the same credentials I do. So does Marcus. This proves nothing. Victoria advanced to the next slide. File metadata doesn't lie. Digital signatures confirm these modifications were made using David's biometric authentication. Unless someone severed his finger and used it to access our systems, these changes were made by David personally. Several board members leaned forward, expressions shifting from skeptical to interested. Victoria pressed her advantage, displaying the email chain Marcus had recovered between David and Richard Harlow. November 8th, David writes to Chairman Harlow suggesting my leadership style is hampering growth. November 21st, Richard responds discussing ways to encourage alternative perspectives on executive management. December 20th, they coordinate on manufacturing a governance crisis. Richard's face flushed deep red. Those messages are taken completely out of context. Every board chairman discusses governance strategy with senior executives. Victoria met his eyes without blinking. Does every board chairman conspire to remove a CEO by manufacturing false evidence? The emails are clear, Richard. You agreed to support David's coup in exchange for maintaining your position as chairman. The room erupted in competing voices. Susan Kingsley demanded to see the full email chain. Harold Pemberton asked if corporate counsel had reviewed this evidence. Margaret Blackwell wanted to know if criminal conduct was being alleged. David raised his hands, calling for calm. This is exactly what I warned the board about. Victoria's making wild accusations to deflect from legitimate concerns. She's been absent during a crisis, and now she's attacking people who've tried to stabilize the company in her absence. Victoria turned to Daniel Pierce. Mr. Pierce, you withdrew your investment offer based on financial irregularities David presented to you. Would you like to know where those irregularities came from? Pierce stood, moving from observer position to active participant. I would very much like to know that, yes. Victoria displayed the access logs showing precisely when each altered transaction was created. Every modification that concerned you was made by David Whitmore during a 6-week period when he was actively negotiating with TechMed Solutions to acquire Medicor at a distressed valuation. Marcus Caldwell discovered this, which is why David had him locked out of our systems and discredited. Pierce's expression darkened. If this is accurate, I made my investment decision based on fraudulent information. That has significant legal implications. David's voice rose. Nothing about this is accurate. Victoria's desperate and she's lying. She's manufactured evidence to cover her own failures. Marcus stood from his observer chair. I have audio recording of David admitting the fraud, recorded on November 25th when I confronted him privately about the irregularities. He pulled out his phone and played the file. David's voice came through clearly. Marcus, you're being paranoid. Those adjustments are standard timing differences. Marcus's recorded response. David, these aren't timing differences. This is fraud. We could go to prison. David's voice, angry now. Nobody's going to prison. Victoria signs off on financials. If SEC investigates, it's on her. She's CEO. Marcus's voice. You're setting her up? David's response. I'm protecting myself. And you better decide whose side you're on. The recording ended. Silence filled the conference room. Every board member stared at David, who'd gone pale. Patricia Westbrook spoke first. That recording is clear evidence of intent to commit fraud and to frame Victoria for it. David, I move for your immediate removal from all positions and referral to appropriate authorities. David's hands shook. That recording is illegal. Marcus recorded me without permission. Marcus smiled thinly. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state. I was party to the conversation. The recording is entirely legal. Richard Harlow looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His voice came out strained. We need time to review all of this with counsel. The allegations are serious on both sides. Victoria pulled up one more file, the final piece of evidence. Here's David's signed term sheet with TechMed Solutions. Note Section 7.3. Upon acquisition, buyer shall discontinue development and commercialization of seller's proprietary diagnostic algorithms to eliminate competitive conflict with buyer's existing product lines. She let that sink in before continuing. David wasn't just stealing the company. He was planning to destroy our core technology, the algorithms I developed to prevent diagnostic failures like the ones that killed my parents. He was going to shelve them in exchange for a $40 million executive package. The room erupted again, but this time the anger was directed at David. Robert Sinclair demanded to know if the technology elimination was really part of the acquisition terms. Margaret Blackwell asked why anyone would trust David with leadership after such betrayal. Even James Fairchild, who'd been solidly in David's camp, looked shaken. David tried one more defense. "You're all missing the point. Victoria rejected opportunities to maximize shareholder value. She put mission over profit, idealism over pragmatism. I was trying to save this company from her stubborn refusal to adapt." Victoria's voice cut through the noise. "I built this company to save lives, not to maximize quarterly returns. If you want a CEO who prioritizes stock price over patient outcomes, then vote me out. But do it honestly, not through fraud and conspiracy." She pulled the partnership proposal Lucas had prepared from her folder. "I met an engineer in Vermont, MIT graduate. His wife died from misdiagnosis because a rural hospital didn't have reliable backup power. He spent 4 years developing revolutionary microgrid technology that could save countless lives. Every major investor wanted 80% equity and control, wanted to strip expensive features to maximize margins, wanted to sell to wealthy hospitals instead of rural clinics that actually need it." Victoria set the proposal in front of Richard Harlow. "I'm offering him a partnership where he keeps majority ownership and full creative control, where our company provides resources without taking over, where implementation prioritizes facilities that need it most regardless of ability to pay premium prices. That's the kind of company I'm building. If you want something different, then David's your man." The words hung in the room. Board members looked at each other, calculating, weighing, deciding which version of Medicor they wanted to support. Harold Pemberton cleared his throat. "I'd like to make a motion. Remove David Whitmore for cause, refer evidence of fraud to appropriate authorities, and affirm confidence in Victoria Ashford's continued leadership." "All in favor?" Patricia Westbrook's hand went up immediately, then Robert Sinclair's. Margaret Blackwell raised hers after a moment's hesitation. Harold's own hand rose. 4 votes. James Fairchild looked at David, then at Victoria, then raised his hand slowly. 5 votes. Susan Kingsley kept her hand down, loyalty to David overriding evidence. Richard Harlow's hand stayed on the table, face unreadable. Patricia counted. 5 votes in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention. The motion carries. David, you're removed effective immediately. Richard, as chairman, you need to declare the result. Richard Harlow sat frozen for a long moment. His entire careful political calculation had collapsed. He'd backed David's coup, and now evidence of that backing existed in documented emails that could destroy his reputation. Patricia Westbrook's voice cut through the silence. "Richard, given your documented collaboration with David's conspiracy, I move that you recuse yourself from declaring this vote. Harold, as senior independent board member, please declare the result." Harold Pemberton nodded gravely. "Motion carries 5-1 with 1 abstention. David Whitmore is removed from all positions with Medicor Health Systems effective immediately. Victoria Ashford's position as CEO is affirmed. And Richard," he looked directly at the chairman, "the board will be scheduling a special session to review your continued service as chairman. I suggest you consider your options." Richard's face drained of color. He stood slowly, gathering his papers. "I'll submit my resignation as chairman effective end of business today. I'll remain as a board member pending the investigation, but I recognize my position is untenable." Victoria felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that the conspiracy had been fully exposed. David stood slowly. His face had gone from pale to flushed, rage barely contained. "You're all making a mistake. This company will fail without me. Victoria's idealism will destroy everything we built." Victoria remained seated, voice level. "We'll see who was right about what this company should be. Security will escort you out." 2 security officers appeared at the conference room door. They flanked David as he gathered his belongings, movements jerky with suppressed fury. At the door, he turned back. 15 years, Victoria. I gave you 15 years, and this is how you repay me." Victoria met his eyes without flinching. You repaid 15 years of partnership by trying to frame me for fraud you committed. We're done, David. After he left, the remaining board members sat in uncomfortable silence. Richard Harlow looked diminished, uncertain how much Victoria would pursue his involvement. The others avoided eye contact, dealing with the whiplash of having nearly voted out a CEO who'd just proven her accusations correct. Daniel Pierce approached Victoria. I need to review the complete financial documentation. If everything you've shown is verified, Horizon Capital will reinstate our investment offer. Increased from the original $175 million to $200 million, your partnership model represents exactly the kind of mission-driven innovation we should be backing. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. I'll have Marcus provide complete documentation tomorrow. Patricia Westbrook touched Victoria's arm. You need to address the staff. They've been terrified all afternoon, thinking the company was collapsing. They need to see you're still in command. Victoria nodded, exhaustion hitting her like a physical weight. She'd driven 5 hours, fought through a corporate coup, and exposed a conspiracy, but the work wasn't finished. It never was. She rode the elevator down to the 3rd floor where most of the staff worked. Word had spread already. People clustered around desks, talking in low voices, checking phones for updates. When Victoria stepped into the open workspace, conversation stopped. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Maya handed her a wireless microphone. Victoria's voice echoed across the floor. I know today was frightening. David Whitmore sent emails suggesting major changes, hiring freezes, uncertainties about the future. I'm here to tell you that David is no longer with Medicor. He was removed by the board after evidence showed he'd been manipulating our financial records and planning to sell the company to a competitor who would eliminate our core innovations. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria continued. This company was built on a mission to prevent diagnostic failures that kill people. That mission hasn't changed. I haven't changed. We're going forward exactly as planned, with one new addition. We're partnering with an independent inventor who's developed revolutionary backup power systems for rural hospitals. It's exactly the kind of innovation we exist to support. Someone in the back called out, Are our jobs safe? Victoria didn't sugarcoat. The next few months will be challenging. We'll face questions from investors and possibly from regulators investigating David's fraud. But yes, your jobs are safe. We're not cutting staff. We're not stopping development. We're doing what we've always done, building technology that saves lives. Applause started somewhere and spread, not enthusiastic cheering, but relieved acknowledgement that the crisis had passed. Victoria handed the microphone back to Maya and returned to her office on the executive floor. The space felt different somehow. 3 days ago, she'd left here confident and in control. Now she understood how fragile that control had been, how close she'd come to losing everything. The photograph of her parents still sat on the desk. Her father's face frozen in time at 53, never aging beyond the moment before cancer killed him. She pulled out her phone and called Lucas. He answered on the second ring. Did you make it? Victoria's voice cracked slightly. I made it. Your bypass system held exactly long enough. The car died 3 blocks from my office, but I got here. I won the vote. David's out. Lucas's relief came through clearly. That's good. That's really good. Emma's been worried, kept asking if you were okay. Tell her I'm okay. Tell her I kept my promise. A pause. Then Lucas spoke more quietly. The partnership proposal. Was it useful? Victoria looked at the folder still sitting on her desk. It convinced the board I'm serious about mission over profit, and it convinced Daniel Pierce to reinstate his investment with an increase. We're going forward with it, Lucas. Your technology is going to save lives. Then I guess we're partners. Victoria heard emotion in those simple words. I guess we are. I need to draft formal terms, get legal review, make sure everything protects your interests properly. But yes, partners. After hanging up, Victoria opened her laptop and began working through the 100 tasks that demanded attention. Messages to staff, updates to investors, coordination with corporate counsel on David's removal, requests for forensic accounting to document the full extent of the fraud. Each item checked off the list brought marginal progress toward stability. Maya appeared at her door around 11 p.m. Victoria, you've been here for 6 hours since the board meeting. You need sleep. Victoria glanced at the clock, surprised at how much time had passed. There's too much to do. There's always too much to do. But you drove 5 hours, survived a corporate coup, and exposed a fraud conspiracy. You're allowed to rest. The observation penetrated Victoria's workaholic momentum. Maya was right. The immediate crisis had passed. Everything else could wait until tomorrow. She saved her documents and shut down the laptop. The drive to her apartment in Back Bay took 20 minutes. The penthouse condo was exactly as she'd left it 3 days ago. Minimalist furniture, expensive art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It felt sterile now after Pine Ridge's cluttered warmth, after Emma's handmade decorations and Lucas's practical functionality. Victoria showered and changed into comfortable clothes, then stood at the window looking out at Boston's nighttime skyline. Somewhere out there, David Whitmore was dealing with his catastrophic failure. Richard Harlow was calculating how to salvage his reputation. Marcus was probably still compiling documentation to support potential criminal charges. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you won. Proud of you. Don't forget where you came from or why you started. Your dad. Victoria stared at the message, confusion mixing with impossible hope. Her father had been dead for 20 years. This had to be a wrong number, a coincidence, someone else texting their daughter. Then a second message arrived. Sorry, meant metaphorically. You're still the kid who used life insurance money to start a company because she wanted to fix a broken system. Stay that person. Lucas. Victoria laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. Lucas was right. She'd almost lost herself in corporate politics and quarterly pressure. David's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also reminded her why she'd built Medicor in the first place. She texted back, "Thank you for saving my company, and for reminding me what it's for." Response came immediately. "Thank you for giving my wife's legacy a chance to matter. Sleep well." Victoria fell asleep on the couch, still holding her phone, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical fatigue. When she woke, pale winter light was filtering through the windows. Her neck ached from the awkward angle. Her body protested movement after yesterday's marathon drive, but she was still CEO. The company was still hers, and somewhere in Vermont, an engineer was probably already working on microgrid prototypes that would save lives in rural hospitals. 3 days ago, Victoria Ashford had been a CEO convinced she had everything under control. Today she was a CEO who understood how fragile control really was, how easily years of work could nearly be destroyed by someone she'd trusted completely. The lesson was painful but necessary. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Emma's pinky promise photo she'd taken before leaving Pine Ridge. The 8-year-old's serious expression captured perfectly the weight of that commitment. Victoria had promised to return, had promised to be friends, had promised that superheroes always won. Now she needed to keep those promises while building a company that valued mission over metrics, that supported innovators like Lucas instead of exploiting them, that remembered why it existed even when quarterly pressure demanded compromise. The work would never be finished. There would always be another crisis, another challenge, another David Whitmore waiting to exploit weakness. But Victoria finally understood that survival wasn't about preventing every crisis. It was about remembering your foundation clearly enough to rebuild when things collapsed. She stood and stretched, wincing at tight muscles and lingering aches. Time to return to the office, face the aftermath, begin the long process of actually implementing the partnership and proving that mission-driven business could succeed without betraying its principles. 3 days in Pine Ridge had changed everything. Victoria finally understood that survival wasn't about preventing every crisis. It was about remembering your foundation clearly enough to rebuild when things collapsed. And knowing that some partnerships, like the one with Lucas Brennan, were worth fighting for not because they were easy or profitable, but because they were right. She looked at Emma's pinky promise photo one more time, then stood. The work was never finished. But for the first time in 15 years, Victoria wasn't running toward the next achievement. She was walking toward the life she'd promised to build, one imperfect cookie at a time. March arrived with the kind of raw cold that promised winter wasn't finished despite what the calendar suggested. Victoria stood in her Boston office watching sleet streak the windows, phone pressed to her ear while Marcus walked her through the latest FDA submission requirements for Lucas's microgrid system. 3 months since David's removal, and the partnership that had started as political necessity was becoming the most challenging project of her career. Marcus's voice carried frustration. They're requesting additional safety testing, 6 more months minimum, possibly 12. The battery chemistry is too novel for their standard approval pathway. Victoria checked her calendar. A pilot program with 3 rural hospitals in Appalachia was scheduled to begin in April. Delays would mean renegotiating contracts, managing disappointed stakeholders, and explaining to Lucas why bureaucracy was strangling his innovation. What's the alternative pathway? Conditional approval for limited deployment. We'd need to accept enhanced monitoring requirements and quarterly safety audits. More expensive, more administrative burden, but we could start the pilot on schedule. Do it. File the conditional application today. After hanging up, Victoria pulled up the partnership financials. Medicor had invested $8 million over 3 months. Lucas's share of development costs was covered through the agreement, but his auto repair business in Pine Ridge was suffering from his divided attention. He'd hired a manager, but the transition wasn't smooth. Revenue had dropped 30% while Lucas spent 3 days a week in Boston managing technical development. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. FDA meeting went badly. Need to talk. Victoria called immediately. Lucas answered with background noise, suggesting he was in the fabrication workshop they'd set up in Cambridge. The safety testing requirements are going to push us back a year minimum, maybe more. Marcus is filing for conditional approval. We can start the pilot with enhanced monitoring. Lucas's relief was audible. That works. But Victoria, we need to discuss budget. The testing protocols they're requiring will cost another $2 million. That wasn't in our original projections. Victoria pulled up the partnership budget spreadsheet. They'd already exceeded initial estimates by 15%. Adding another $2 million would require board approval, and several members remained skeptical about the partnership's commercial viability. I'll present it to the board next week. We'll get the funding. What if they say no? The question hung between them. Victoria had promised Lucas that money wouldn't dictate development priorities, that the partnership would prioritize mission over margins, but she still answered to a board that measured success in return on investment. Then I'll fund it personally if necessary. That's not sustainable, Victoria. You can't bankroll every cost overrun out of your own pocket. He was right, but Victoria didn't have better answers. The partnership model she'd sold to the board assumed relatively straightforward development and regulatory approval. Reality was proving messier, more expensive, more complicated than anyone had anticipated. After the call ended, Patricia Westbrook appeared in Victoria's doorway. The board member had become an unlikely ally, supporting Victoria through the aftermath of David's removal and the subsequent SEC investigation. We need to talk about Richard Harlow. Victoria gestured her inside. What's he done now? Patricia settled into the visitor chair. We need to talk about the new board members. Victoria's attention sharpened. What about them? Dr. Michael Strauss and Jennifer Huang, the two seats we filled after David and Richard's departures. They're building opposition to the Lucas Brennan partnership. Victoria pulled up the board roster. Dr. Strauss, former McKinsey partner, brought in by the remaining skeptical members to add financial discipline. Jennifer Huang, Silicon Valley venture capitalist, known for aggressive growth strategies. Both had joined in February after David's removal and Richard's resignation. They weren't here for David's betrayal, Patricia continued. They didn't see the fraud, didn't witness how close we came to losing everything. To them, the partnership is just numbers on a spreadsheet, and the numbers look expensive. Strauss and Huang, Victoria processed. Who else? Susan Kingsley's allied with them. She's still bitter about David's removal. James Fairchild is listening to their arguments. That's 4 votes if they move together. You've got me and Harold Pemberton solid. Robert Sinclair and Margaret Blackwell are undecided. Same math as before. 7 board members. Victoria needed 4 votes to survive. She had 2 confirmed, maybe 3 if she could flip 1 undecided member. Not enough margin for comfort. When are they planning to force the vote? Patricia's expression turned grim. Next board meeting, 2 weeks from now. Strauss is framing it as responsible governance, asking whether we should continue pouring money into a partnership that's behind schedule and over budget. He's very good at making cold financial analysis sound like fiduciary duty. Undermining Victoria's flagship initiative would rebuild his credibility as a pragmatic voice of fiscal responsibility. How many votes does he have? 3 firm, including himself. Susan Kingsley and James Fairchild are listening to his arguments. You've got me and Harold Pemberton solidly supporting continuation. Robert Sinclair and Margaret Blackwell are undecided. Same math as before. 7 board members, Victoria needed 4 votes to survive any confidence motion. She had 2 confirmed, possibly 3 if she could convince one of the undecided members. Not enough margin for comfort. When's he planning to force the vote? Patricia's expression turned grim. Next board meeting. 2 weeks from now. He's framing it as responsible governance, asking whether we should continue pouring money into a partnership that's behind schedule and over budget. Victoria's jaw tightened. She'd barely survived David's coup 3 months ago. Now she faced another challenge to her authority, this time from someone who'd learned from David's mistakes. Richard wouldn't manufacture evidence or commit fraud. He'd simply used legitimate concerns about budget and timeline to build a case that Victoria's judgment was compromised by personal attachment to Lucas and his project. I need to demonstrate concrete progress before that meeting. Something that proves the partnership's value beyond theoretical potential. Patricia stood. Then you'd better work fast. Richard's good at board politics, and he's learned to package self-interest as fiduciary responsibility. After Patricia left, Victoria called Lucas again. We need to accelerate the pilot program. Can you have a working system ready for installation in 2 weeks instead of 4? Lucas exhaled slowly. Technically possible, but risky. We'd be installing beta-level systems without completing full validation testing. If something fails during a critical moment, I understand the risks. But Richard Harlow is building support to kill the partnership. If we don't demonstrate real-world value before the next board meeting, this project dies. Silence stretched across the connection. Victoria could almost hear Lucas calculating, weighing engineering caution against political necessity. Which hospital? Appalachian Regional Medical Center. They've had 6 major power outages in the past 18 months. Last one killed power to their ICU for 8 hours. They're desperate for reliable backup. I'll need to be on site for installation and initial monitoring. That's minimum 5 days away from here, probably longer if complications arise. Victoria checked her calendar. I'll come with you. Hands-on CEO involvement demonstrates commitment to the board. Plus, I can handle administrative coordination while you focus on technical work. Victoria, you don't need to... Yes, I do. This partnership is my responsibility as much as yours. We succeed or fail together. The following morning, Victoria drove to Pine Ridge. She hadn't returned since Christmas Eve, communication with Lucas happening entirely through phone calls and video conferences. The town looked different in early spring. Snow melted into mud, and last year's decorations replaced by Easter displays in shop windows. Brennan's auto repair showed signs of Lucas's divided attention. The manager he'd hired, a young mechanic named Tyler, seemed competent but overwhelmed. The garage bays were full of vehicles in various states of repair, and the waiting area held frustrated customers who'd been told their cars wouldn't be ready for several more days. Emma was in the upstairs apartment doing homework when Victoria arrived. The girl looked up from math problems and squealed, "Victoria, you came back! Daddy said you were too busy, but I knew you'd keep your pinky promise." Victoria knelt to accept Emma's enthusiastic hug, surprised by how much she'd missed this uncomplicated affection. "I always keep my promises. How's school?" Emma launched into detailed description of her science fair project, something involving water purification and solar power that sounded suspiciously advanced for a 9-year-old. Lucas appeared from the garage looking exhausted, grease smudged across his forehead. His smile softened his weathered features. "Didn't expect to see you until we left for West Virginia. Thought I'd check on how things are going here." Tyler seems stressed. Lucas's smile faded. "He's doing his best. But I've been gone too much, and the business is suffering. Lost 3 long-term customers this month because their repairs took too long. Word spreads in small towns." They walked through the garage while Lucas pointed out the backlog. 2 weeks of work minimum, and that assumed no new customers arrived. Victoria saw the calculation forming in his mind, the realization that something would have to give. Either the partnership would consume his auto repair business, or the business would force him to reduce time on development. What if we hire another mechanic, someone with enough experience to handle complex repairs without your direct supervision? Lucas shook his head. "Can't afford it. The business margins are tight as it is. Adding salary for a senior mechanic would put me underwater." Victoria made a decision that would probably look terrible in board minutes, but felt necessary. What if the partnership covers half the salary? Frame it as ensuring your availability for development work, legitimate business expense. "That's generous, but it feels like you're subsidizing my personal business." "I'm ensuring our technical lead can focus on the partnership without destroying the life he's built." "There's a difference." Lucas studied her face, searching for something. "You're worried about the board vote. That's why you're here, why you're pushing to accelerate the pilot. This isn't about the technology. It's about politics." Victoria didn't insult him by denying it. "Richard Harlow wants to kill the partnership to rebuild his credibility. If we don't show dramatic progress before the next board meeting, he'll have the votes. So yes, this is about politics. But the politics exist because the technology matters. If your microgrid saves lives, the board won't be able to justify termination regardless of what Richard wants." Emma called from upstairs. "Daddy! Victoria! I made sandwiches for lunch. Come eat." They climbed to the apartment where Emma had prepared peanut butter and jelly with the careful precision of a child determined to help. Lucas and Victoria sat at the small kitchen table while Emma narrated her day's activities, oblivious to the adult tensions swirling around her. After lunch, Lucas pulled out technical drawings for the Appalachian Regional installation. The hospital's electrical infrastructure was antiquated, presenting challenges the microgrid system would need to compensate for. The installation would require careful integration with existing generators and manual switching systems. "The biggest risk is during cutover. We'll need to transfer critical loads from their current backup generator to our system. If anything goes wrong during that window, we could lose power to ICU, surgery, anywhere life support is running." Victoria absorbed the implications. "How long is the transfer window?" "Best case, 2 minutes. Worst case, 5. Hospital administration agreed to schedule the cutover during low census periods to minimize risk, but there's no such thing as zero risk when you're dealing with critical care. The weight of that settled heavily. Victoria had pushed for acceleration, had insisted on demonstrating value before the board vote. But people's lives would depend on the system working correctly from day one. No room for beta testing failures when a patient's ventilator was at stake. If you think we should wait, if the risks are too high, Lucas met her eyes. The risks are always too high when you're innovating. Jennifer died because a hospital didn't have reliable power. How many more people die while I wait for perfect conditions? We move forward carefully, but we move forward. 3 days later, Victoria and Lucas drove to West Virginia in a rented truck loaded with equipment. The journey took 9 hours through mountain roads that tested the vehicle's suspension and Victoria's patience. Emma had stayed with her grandparents in Pine Ridge, disappointed to miss the adventure but understanding that hospitals weren't appropriate places for children to play. Appalachian Regional Medical Center occupied a hilltop outside a town of 8,000. The facility served a region covering 3 counties, providing the only emergency and critical care within a 50-mile radius. The building dated from the 1960s, brick and concrete construction that had been added onto multiple times, creating a maze of connected wings. Dr. Sarah Hammond, the hospital's chief medical officer, met them in the parking lot. She was in her late 50s, gray hair pulled back severely, expression carrying the weariness of someone who'd spent decades fighting inadequate resources. Mr. Brennan, Ms. Ashford, thank you for coming. Our last power outage was 3 weeks ago. Lost electricity for 6 hours, including to our backup generator. We were running critical patients on battery-powered equipment and praying nothing catastrophic happened. Lucas began unloading equipment. Your electrical infrastructure is original to the building, and Hammond nodded. With patches and additions over 5 decades, the utility company does their best, but we're at the end of a rural line. Storms, ice, trees falling on wires. We lose power monthly. The backup generator is 20 years old and fails half the time. They spent the afternoon surveying the installation site. The microgrid system would occupy a newly constructed enclosure behind the hospital, connected to the building's electrical distribution through a dedicated substation. Lucas worked methodically, measuring, photographing, consulting technical specifications. Victoria handled coordination with hospital administration, reviewing contracts and insurance requirements and safety protocols. The hospital's attorney had concerns about liability if the system failed during operation. Medicor's insurance carrier wanted additional documentation about testing and certification. Every detail that seemed straightforward in Boston became complicated when confronted with real-world implementation. By evening, Lucas had developed a detailed installation plan. The actual equipment placement would take 2 days. Integration with existing electrical systems would require another day. Testing and validation another 2 days minimum. The critical cutover could happen on day 6 if everything proceeded smoothly. They checked into a modest hotel in town, adjoining rooms with a door between that stayed open while they worked late reviewing plans. Lucas marked up technical drawings while Victoria drafted status reports for the board. The work felt comfortable despite its intensity, 2 people solving problems in complementary ways. Around midnight, Lucas set down his pen. You never told me what happened to your Range Rover. Last I saw, it had died 3 blocks from your office. Victoria looked up from her laptop. Towed to a dealer. Repairs cost $14,000. I sold it afterward. Bought a Subaru, more practical for New England weather. Practical. That's new for you. She caught the gentle teasing in his voice. 3 months ago, I would have bought another luxury vehicle to replace it. Now I'm driving a Subaru and eating cafeteria food in West Virginia hospitals. You're a terrible influence. Or maybe you're remembering what matters versus what impresses people. The observation struck deeper than Lucas probably intended. Victoria had spent 15 years building an image of success measured in expensive possessions and executive perks. David's betrayal had shattered that image, forcing her to examine what remained when the superficial trappings fell away. She changed the subject. Emma's science fair project, water purification using solar power, that's your influence. Lucas smiled. She's obsessed with the idea that technology should help people who need it most. Keeps asking why rich people have clean water but poor people don't. And if we're so smart, why haven't we fixed that yet? Hard to argue with 9-year-old logic. She's right. We build technology for people who can afford it, then act surprised when inequality persists. Lucas studied her. Is that what you're trying to fix with Medicore? Build technology for people who can't afford it? Victoria considered the question. I'm trying to build technology that prevents what happened to my parents. To your wife. The diagnostic failures that kill people because systems weren't designed to catch edge cases or handle emergencies. But yes, part of that means serving populations that traditional healthcare ignores. They worked in companionable silence for another hour before Lucas announced he needed sleep. After he retreated to his room, Victoria stood at the window looking out at the small town's nighttime darkness. So different from Boston's constant illumination. Here you could see stars, could feel the weight of rural isolation that made reliable infrastructure literally life or death important. Her phone buzzed with an email from Richard Harlow. Subject line, Partnership Review, Board Discussion. The message was professionally worded, but the intent was clear. Richard wanted detailed financial justification for every dollar spent on Lucas's project, wanted projections showing path to profitability, wanted Victoria to defend the partnership using language that reduced innovation to spreadsheet calculations. She drafted a careful response explaining that transformative technology required patience, that mission-driven work couldn't always be evaluated using traditional metrics, that sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting lower immediate returns. But she knew Richard would use her own words against her, would paint her as emotionally compromised and fiscally irresponsible. The installation began at 7 a.m. with Lucas and a contracted electrical crew cutting into the hospital's main distribution panel. Dr. Hammond had arranged to reduce patient census in critical areas, postponing non-emergency procedures and transferring unstable patients to facilities in larger towns. The hospital operated at 60% normal capacity, a calculated risk to minimize danger during the cutover. Victoria watched from the electrical room as Lucas worked with focused intensity, directing the crew with clear instructions and constant safety checks. This was where his MIT training showed most clearly, in the way he understood complex systems holistically and could troubleshoot problems in real time without needing to consult manuals or call technical support. By noon, the physical installation was complete. The microgrid enclosure hummed quietly behind the hospital, solar panels angled to catch maximum sunlight, micro-wind turbines rotating slowly in the mountain breeze, battery banks storing energy with revolutionary efficiency. It looked unimpressive from outside, just another utility installation. But Lucas's eyes showed pride in what they'd accomplished. The integration phase began after lunch. This was where things could go catastrophically wrong, where connecting new systems to old infrastructure created opportunities for cascading failures. Lucas moved carefully, testing each connection multiple times before proceeding to the next stage. Victoria handled communication with hospital staff, updating Dr. Hammond every hour, reassuring nervous administrators that progress remained on schedule. She'd become the translator between Lucas's technical certainty and everyone else's anxiety about entrusting critical care to untested technology. Day 2 proceeded smoothly until evening, when Lucas discovered a grounding issue in the hospital's electrical panel. The existing grounding system didn't meet current code requirements, creating potential safety hazards for the microgrid connection. Fixing it properly would require another day and additional equipment that wasn't readily available in rural West Virginia. Lucas called Victoria into the electrical room. "We have options. Install temporary grounding that meets minimum safety standards but isn't ideal, or delay cutover until we can bring in proper equipment and do this correctly." Victoria checked her watch. The board meeting was in 12 days. Delaying meant returning to Boston without the dramatic demonstration of success she'd promised. But rushing meant accepting safety compromises that violated everything the partnership was supposed to represent. "What would you do if I wasn't here pressuring you for results?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "Wait, do it right. A grounding failure during cutover could kill someone." "Then we wait. I'll handle the board." Relief crossed his features. "I'll call suppliers in Pittsburgh. We can get the equipment by day after tomorrow, install it properly on day 4, be ready for cutover on day 6. 1-day delay." That evening, Victoria drafted an email to Patricia Westbrook explaining the delay. She tried to frame it positively, emphasizing Lucas's commitment to safety over expediency, but knew Richard would use this as evidence that the partnership was plagued by problems and poor planning. Patricia's response came within minutes. "Richard's already circulating talking points about cost overruns and timeline failures. You need this installation to be flawless, Victoria. One mistake, and he'll have the votes to kill the partnership." Victoria stepped outside the hotel into cool mountain air. The pressure was immense, the stakes higher than any business deal she'd negotiated. This wasn't about quarterly earnings or market share. This was about whether innovation that prioritized mission over profit could survive in a corporate structure that measured success primarily through financial returns. Lucas found her sitting on a bench outside the hotel entrance. "You're worried about the board." Victoria didn't deny it. "I'm worried I've backed us into a corner where we need perfect results immediately or the whole project collapses. That's not how innovation works. Breakthrough technology requires iteration, requires learning from failures. But corporate boards don't have patience for that." Lucas sat beside her. "So we show them why patience matters. We demonstrate that doing things right, prioritizing safety and thoroughness, produces better results than rushing to meet arbitrary deadlines. That only works if the system performs flawlessly once installed. If anything goes wrong, then we fix it. And we document what went wrong and how we addressed it. Failure isn't fatal, Victoria. Failure to learn from failure is fatal." His calm certainty was reassuring even as Victoria's anxiety remained. She'd spent her career building success through careful control and risk mitigation. Lucas operated differently, accepting that complex systems would have problems and focusing on robust problem-solving rather than perfect prevention. The replacement grounding equipment arrived on schedule. Installation proceeded smoothly, Lucas working alongside the electrical crew to ensure every connection met specifications. By day 6, the system was ready for cutover testing. Dr. Hammond gathered her senior staff in the electrical room for final briefing. Lucas walked them through the cutover procedure, explaining how the microgrid would take over from the existing backup generator, how the battery systems would provide seamless power during transition, how the solar and wind components would keep the system charged during normal operation. Critical loads will transfer in sequence. Life support first, then ICU equipment, then surgical and emergency department systems. Total transfer window is 90 seconds. You'll barely notice the transition." A surgeon raised his hand. "What if it fails? What's our backup?" Lucas met his eyes directly. "The old generator stays in place as secondary backup. If the microgrid fails during cutover, we'll switch back immediately. But it won't fail. I've tested every component of this system personally." Victoria heard the certainty in his voice, the engineer's confidence that came from understanding exactly how things worked. But she also knew that complex systems failed in unexpected ways, that no amount of testing could predict every real-world scenario. The cutover was scheduled for 2 a.m. when patient census was lowest and most procedures could be safely postponed. Victoria spent the evening in the hospital cafeteria reviewing board materials, trying to anticipate every argument Richard would make and preparing counter-arguments. But her mind kept drifting to the electrical room where Lucas was running final checks. At 1:30 a.m., she abandoned her laptop and went to find him. He was in the microgrid enclosure behind the hospital, flashlight illuminating battery banks and control systems. His expression was focused, checking readings and comparing them to expected values. "Everything ready?" Lucas nodded. "As ready as it's going to be. Batteries at 98% charge. Solar and wind components online. Control systems responding normally. All diagnostic checks passing." They returned to the electrical room where Dr. Hammond and her team had gathered. The hospital felt eerily quiet at this hour, most patients sleeping, only essential staff on duty. Lucas positioned himself at the control panel, hand hovering over the cutover switch. "Beginning transfer in 3, 2, 1, mark." He threw the switch. For 3 seconds, nothing visible happened. Then meters on the control panel shifted, showing power flowing from the old generator to the microgrid system. Lights flickered once, so briefly Victoria wasn't sure she'd actually seen it. The ventilator in the adjacent ICU continued its steady rhythm. Monitors in the nursing station maintained their displays without interruption. Lucas watched the control panel. "Transfer complete. All critical loads running on microgrid power. Battery draw minimal. System stable." Dr. Hammond checked with her staff via radio. ICU reported normal operation. Surgery confirmed all equipment functioning. Emergency department had noticed nothing during transition. The cutover had been seamless, exactly as Lucas had promised. Victoria felt tension drain from her shoulders. The system worked. Months of development, millions of dollars invested, countless hours of Lucas's engineering expertise, all validated in 90 seconds of flawless performance. But the real test would come later, when storms knocked out utility power, and the microgrid needed to maintain hospital operations independently. Lucas explained they'd monitor system performance for 72 hours, simulating various failure scenarios to ensure robust operation under stress conditions. Over the next 3 days, they tested everything. Simulated utility power loss, disabled solar panels to test battery backup, shut down wind turbines to verify redundancy. Each test confirmed that the system performed as designed, maintaining reliable power through scenarios that would have crippled traditional backup generators. On the final day, a genuine emergency tested the system for real. A severe thunderstorm rolled through the mountains, knocking out utility power to the hospital and half the surrounding county. The microgrid switched to independent operation seamlessly, maintaining full power to critical systems, while the backup generator didn't even activate. Dr. Hammond found Victoria in the cafeteria. "Your system just saved lives. We had 3 patients on ventilators, 2 in surgery and 1 in critical cardiac monitoring when power failed. Normally, we'd have 5 minutes of battery backup before switching to the generator, which fails 30% of the time. Today, nobody even noticed the outage except facilities staff." Victoria felt something shift inside her, the abstract concept of saving lives becoming concrete reality. Somewhere in this hospital, people were breathing because Lucas's engineering ensured their ventilators didn't lose power. Someone was recovering from surgery because the operating room lights stayed on. This wasn't theoretical mission-driven work anymore. This was actual human impact. She found Lucas in the electrical room reviewing system logs. The storm was the perfect real-world validation. System performed flawlessly. Lucas nodded, but his expression remained focused. "It worked this time, but I'm seeing battery discharge rates slightly higher than modeled. Nothing critical, but worth investigating before we replicate this installation elsewhere." Even in success, he was thinking about improvements. Victoria recognized the engineering mindset, the refusal to accept good enough when better was possible. It was the same drive that had kept him working on this project for 4 years, despite repeated rejections from investors who wanted faster returns. They drove back to Boston in companionable silence, exhaustion and satisfaction mixing together. The installation had demonstrated that Lucas's technology worked, that the partnership could deliver real value. But Victoria knew the board fight was still coming, that Richard would find ways to undermine even this success. 2 days before the board meeting, Marcus called with news that made Victoria's stomach drop. TechMed Solutions just announced they're launching their own backup power initiative for rural hospitals. They're positioning it as charitable work, tax-deductible donations of refurbished generators to facilities that can't afford new equipment. Victoria understood the threat immediately. They're undercutting our market positioning, making it look like we're trying to profit from rural hospital vulnerability while they're providing free solutions. Worse than that, their press release specifically mentions that complex new technologies require expensive installation and maintenance, implying that simpler solutions serve these communities better. They're painting Lucas's system as overcomplicated and your partnership as exploitative. The attack was sophisticated. TechMed couldn't directly respond to David's attempted fraud, but they could undermine the partnership that had helped Victoria defeat David. By positioning themselves as the charitable alternative, they made Medicor's commercial approach look greedy by comparison. Victoria drafted a response emphasizing that refurbished generators didn't address the reliability problems that plagued rural hospitals, that Lucas's system provided true resilience through renewable energy and advanced battery technology. But she knew the nuanced argument would struggle against TechMed's simpler narrative of free help versus expensive innovation. The board meeting began with Richard Harlow's presentation on partnership finances. He'd assembled a devastating case using factual information presented in the worst possible light. Cost overruns highlighted, timeline delays emphasized, FDA regulatory challenges described as fundamental design flaws, TechMed's competitive initiative positioned as superior alternative. Medicor has invested $9.3 million in this partnership. We've received zero revenue. The pilot installation required multiple delays due to safety concerns. FDA approval remains uncertain. And now a competitor is providing similar solutions at no cost to hospitals. I move that we suspend the partnership pending comprehensive financial review. Patricia Westbrook immediately countered, Lucas Brennan's system performed flawlessly during a real emergency at Appalachian Regional. That's not theoretical value, that's demonstrated life-saving impact. TechMed's refurbished generators are exactly the unreliable systems that created the problem in the first place. But Richard had anticipated the rebuttal. One successful installation doesn't justify the expense or prove commercial viability. We're a for-profit company, not a charity. The partnership needs to show clear path to positive returns, or we're subsidizing an engineer's personal project with shareholder money. Victoria stood. Lucas Brennan's technology represents the future of healthcare infrastructure. TechMed's approach perpetuates the problems that kill patients during power outages. Yes, our investment is substantial. Yes, development has been slower than initially projected, but transformative innovation requires patience. If this board wants incremental improvements and safe bets, I'm the wrong CEO. If you want breakthrough technology that actually solves problems, then you need to support the partnership through the difficult development phase. The room fell silent. Victoria had made it explicit. A vote against the partnership was a vote against her leadership. Board members would need to choose whether they believed in mission-driven innovation or preferred traditional profit optimization. Robert Sinclair spoke carefully. Victoria, we all respect what you're trying to accomplish. But Richard's concerns are legitimate. Can you provide projections showing when this partnership becomes financially sustainable? Victoria pulled up the analysis Marcus had prepared. Year 1, we're investing in development and regulatory approval. Year 2, we begin commercial installations with positive gross margins. Year 3, we achieve operational profitability. Year 5, The partnership generates substantial returns while providing critical infrastructure to underserved hospitals. That's a 5-year horizon before positive returns. What happens if FDA approval takes longer? If installation costs exceed projections? If competitors like TechMed capture market share with cheaper alternatives? The questions were fair, but Victoria didn't have perfect answers. Innovation meant accepting uncertainty, building something despite not knowing every detail of how it would succeed. Corporate boards struggled with that ambiguity, preferring predictable mediocrity over uncertain excellence. She tried a different approach. Daniel Pierce increased his investment in Medicor specifically because of this partnership. He saw that we're prioritizing mission over short-term profits. If we terminate the partnership now, we signal that Pierce was wrong to trust us, that we're just another company that talks about innovation while retreating to safe conventional approaches. That reputation damage will cost us more than the partnership investment. Harold Pemberton nodded slowly. Victoria's right. Our brand depends on being seen as genuinely innovative, not just incremental improvers. Killing a partnership this visible would hurt us with investors who care about mission-driven work. The debate continued for 90 minutes. Richard kept returning to financial concerns. Patricia and Harold defended the strategic value. The undecided board members asked probing questions without committing to positions. Finally, Richard called for a vote. Motion to suspend the Lucas-Brennan partnership pending comprehensive financial review and development of modified terms that ensure reasonable return on investment within 3 years rather than 5. All in favor? Susan Kingsley and James Fairchild raised their hands immediately. Richard's own hand rose. 3 votes for suspension. Patricia and Harold raised their hands against. 2 votes for continuation. Robert Sinclair and Margaret Blackwell sat with hands down, the decisive votes. They exchanged glances, conducting silent negotiation about which way to break. Robert spoke. I'll vote against suspension on one condition. Victoria provides quarterly financial reviews showing progress toward profitability. If metrics fall significantly below projections, we revisit this decision. No more 5-year plans without accountability checkpoints. Victoria nodded. Agreed. Quarterly reviews with full transparency about challenges and adjustments. Margaret added, and I want to see broader commercialization strategy. One successful installation in West Virginia is promising, but we need pipelines showing how this scales to sufficient volume for positive returns. Marcus is developing that plan now. We'll have detailed commercialization strategy by next board meeting. Robert and Margaret raised their hands against suspension. 4 votes against, 3 for. The partnership survived by the narrowest possible margin. After the meeting ended, Patricia pulled Victoria aside. You won this round, but barely. Richard will be back with more ammunition. You need commercial success fast, or the next vote won't go your way. Victoria understood. She'd bought time, not certainty. The partnership would live or die based on whether Lucas's technology could achieve commercial viability before the board's patience expired. She called Lucas from her car. The partnership survived, barely. We need to accelerate commercialization. How many hospitals can we realistically install by year-end? Lucas was quiet for a moment. If we cut corners, maybe 20. If we do it right, maintaining quality and safety standards, probably 8 to 10. Richard's going to push for 20. He wants numbers that impress investors. I don't work for Richard. I work for hospitals that need reliable power. We do this right or we don't do it at all. Victoria heard the steel in his voice, the line he wouldn't cross. Then we find the balance. 10 installations, flawlessly executed, with documentation showing scalability to larger numbers in year 2. We build credibility through excellence, not quantity. That's the plan I can support. Over the following months, the partnership transformed from speculative investment to operational reality. Lucas's team completed installations in 9 hospitals across Appalachia, rural Maine, and Montana. Each system performed reliably, maintaining power through storms and grid failures that would have crippled traditional backup generators. Press coverage shifted from skeptical to supportive as journalists visited hospitals and interviewed staff whose patients had been protected during emergencies. TechMed's refurbished generator initiative faded from headlines after 3 of their donated units failed during a heat wave in Mississippi, leading to an embarrassing retreat from the charitable positioning. Victoria split her time between Boston and installation sites, learning the technical details of Lucas's work and handling the administrative complexity of scaling innovative technology. The partnership became real in ways that transcended spreadsheet projections, actual human beings whose lives depended on reliable hospital infrastructure. In June, Lucas called her to Pine Ridge for what he described as important news that couldn't be discussed over phone. Victoria drove up on a Friday afternoon, finding the town preparing for summer tourist season with flower baskets on lampposts and fresh paint on Victorian storefronts. Lucas met her at Brennan's Auto Repair, looking nervous in ways she'd never seen. Emma hovered nearby with barely contained excitement, clearly aware of whatever her father was planning to reveal. He led Victoria to the microgrid prototype area, but the equipment had been moved. In its place sat a new design, larger and more sophisticated than the hospital systems. Technical drawings covered the walls showing applications for entire small towns, creating resilient power networks that could survive regional grid failures. I've been working nights on this. Municipal-scale microgrids that could protect whole communities during major disasters. After Hurricane Katrina, after Texas's winter storm crisis, after every catastrophic failure of centralized power systems, we keep rebuilding the same vulnerable infrastructure. This could change that paradigm entirely. Victoria studied the designs with growing excitement. Lucas wasn't thinking incrementally anymore. He was envisioning fundamental transformation of how communities accessed reliable energy. The technical complexity was staggering, but his calculations suggested the approach was viable. This would require major capital investment, way beyond what we've spent on hospital systems. Lucas nodded. I know. That's why I wanted to discuss it in person. This isn't something we pursue now. But maybe in year 3, after we've proven the hospital model, we could expand into community resilience infrastructure. Emma interrupted, unable to contain herself any longer. And then nobody would lose power like we did at Christmas. And hospitals would never have problems. And Daddy's invention would help everybody. The child's enthusiasm captured perfectly the vision Lucas was describing. Not just incremental improvement, but genuine transformation. It was exactly the kind of ambitious thinking that made innovation meaningful rather than just commercially convenient. Victoria made a decision that probably violated every board governance principle. Let's start planning it now. Not implementation, but strategic positioning. If we develop the concept while we're proving hospital systems, we can move faster when the time comes to expand. Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. You're becoming a true believer in mission over margins. Victoria thought about the journey from that Christmas Eve breakdown to this moment. The corporate betrayal survived, the partnership forged, the lives already saved by reliable power in rural hospitals. She thought about her father's misdiagnosis, Lucas's wife's delayed treatment, and every patient whose ventilator stayed running because engineers prioritized solutions over profit margins. Someone once told me that imperfect cookies taste better because you put heart in them, she said quietly. I finally understand he wasn't talking about cookies. Lucas's eyes showed understanding. What was he talking about? Everything that matters. Companies built on mission instead of just metrics. Technology developed for people who need it most, not just people who can pay the most. Partnerships where both people keep their principles intact. She gestured at the municipal-scale designs. And sometimes the courage to envision something bigger than what anyone thinks is possible. That sounds exhausting. Victoria laughed. It is, but the alternative is worse. Going back to who I was before Pine Ridge, before Emma's pinky promises and your cinnamon rolls and the reminder that some things are worth more than quarterly earnings. Outside the workshop window, Pine Ridge prepared for summer tourist season. Emma's laughter echoed from the apartment upstairs where she was probably doing homework with the same intense focus she brought to everything. And somewhere in Appalachia, a hospital maintained critical care through an afternoon thunderstorm because an MIT engineer had refused to compromise his principles and a CEO had remembered why she'd started her company in the first place. The work was never finished. There would always be another challenge, another skeptical board member, another competitor trying to undercut them with cheaper alternatives. But Victoria had learned something crucial in that Vermont garage on Christmas Eve. The hardest battles weren't fought with evidence and board votes. They were fought every day in every choice between easy and right, between profitable and meaningful, between the person you were and the person you wanted to become. I should get back to Boston, Victoria said finally. Board meeting prep. Marcus has financial projections I need to review. And after that? After that, I'm taking Emma to her soccer game Saturday. I promised. Lucas raised an eyebrow. You're coming back this weekend? That's the third weekend in a row. Victoria shrugged, surprised by how natural it felt. Pinky promises are binding, and besides, someone needs to make sure you're eating more than gas station coffee and cinnamon rolls. That is someone being you? That's someone being me. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling with words. Outside, the first spring flowers were pushing through the last patches of snow, imperfect, persistent, refusing to wait for perfect conditions before blooming. Victoria, Lucas said as she turned to leave. Yeah? Thank you. For giving Jennifer's legacy a chance to matter. For giving my work a chance to matter. For giving me, he paused, searching for words, a reason to believe partnerships can work. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Thank you for reminding me what matters more than winning, for showing me that engineering genius and single dad wisdom aren't mutually exclusive, and for making the best damn imperfect cookies I've ever tasted. She drove back to Boston that evening as sunset painted the Vermont mountains in shades of orange and gold. The Subaru's radio played softly, her laptop bag sat forgotten in the passenger seat, and for the first time in 15 years, Victoria Ashford wasn't mentally rehearsing a board presentation or reviewing financial projections. She was thinking about a 9-year-old girl's science fair project, about an engineer who'd turned grief into innovation, about a company that could be more than just profitable, it could be purposeful, and about the long, difficult, necessary work of building the future one imperfect cookie at a time.